Today, I would like to talk about the elephant in the room, I guess, Afghanistan, but I'd like to address it from an historical perspective. What I'm hearing on the news is a lot of emotional crap, as far as I'm concerned. Part of it is, woe is me, these poor suffering people. And I do feel, very bad about the folks and how they're being treated. And it's also, who's at fault and who's going to get their hand slapped for this. It looks like Joe Biden is not doing well in the assessment of the press, at least. But I think more than that, what occurred to me is our lives thus far have been bookended by two major events in our American history. One was Vietnam on the beginning, and now this one, toward not that our life is over, but this one toward in the present. And the two of them are so similar in so many ways that I wonder. I hear some comparisons, but I wonder if people who are, especially anyone under 50 who didn't experience Vietnam, who doesn't really have the feeling for what was going on there, I wonder if they understand how similar it was. But I thought to get started, I listened to an interview. I don't know if you happen to see this, an interview with Sarah Shays on PBS NewsHour. I've got a few minutes of that, and I'd like to just start by sharing that. I think it'll help kind of set the stage for a discussion. So let me share that with you right now.
We return now to our top story as the Taliban struggles to rule amid protests and dissent in Kabul and across the country. William Brangham explores the collapse of the country's government, which was built and supported by the U.S. and its allies for 20 years.
That's right, Judy. For some deeper perspective on how we got here, I'm joined now by someone who has had years-long involvement in Afghanistan. Sarah Shays covered the fall of the Taliban after 9/11 for NPR. She then started and ran several NGOs in the country. She served as an advisor to several senior U.S. military commanders in Afghanistan, and then to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. She's the author of several books. The most recent is On Corruption in America and What is at Stake, and she joins us now from Paris. Sarah Shays, great to have you back on the NewsHour. You recently published an essay called The Ides of August, and in it you laid out several factors that you argue helped get us to where we are today. And the first element was corruption that you pointed to. Can you explain the mechanism? How is it that corruption leads to the fall of the Afghan government?
In simple terms, why would a population take risks to fight the Taliban on behalf of a government that is treating them almost as badly as the Taliban do? So Afghan government officials would shake people down at every interaction. The massive international funding that was arriving in the country was being siphoned off or captured by government officials and their cronies. And from Afghans' perspective, it almost looked like the United States was in favor of this system, because our officials were always seen partnering with these venal Afghan leaders. And no matter how much the population complained, they really couldn't get us to address the issue seriously.
What role did the U.S.'s actions play in this? Did we hinder the corruption? Did we help the corruption? Did we try to stop the corruption?
I have to say, on balance, we enormously helped the corruption. As I say, first of all, by allowing local strongmen to capture the revenue streams. So, for example, you'd have one local strongman who's providing security at a U.S. base, and then he would only allow his people into our contracting conferences, for example. We never held any of the officials that we were partnering with to account. I would say that toward 2009, 2010, we began to catch on to this as a serious issue. And so a decision was made to do a test case with plenty of evidence. It was brilliantly mounted, and it had to do with the with a hole of approximately $900 million in Kabul Bank, right? So we're talking a significant issue here. And the person targeted, who was taking a bribe, was in the palace, was close to President Karzai. Well, as soon as President Karzai threw a fit about the arrest of his henchman, Washington basically executed a U-turn. And the U.S. never took corruption seriously after that. That was in 2010. In 2011, when I was working for the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, there was an interagency policy process that would arrive at a determination how was the United States going to address corruption. And explicitly it was decided that we were not going to focus on any of the high-level corruption, only, quote, street-level police corruption, which of course was the purview of the military. So from my perspective, there was a real dereliction of duty on the part of civilian leadership in the United States.
What I was trying to look at is every time I see these, I go back to the experience in Vietnam and I look at the leadership there and the obvious corruption that was going on. And my question is, did we learn anything between 1974 and 2010? Did we just have a collective memory loss, or have we been played all along? Is this a matter of the American public is being told a bunch of crap always, and when things go foul, we end up bearing the brunt of it, either through the death of our kids or through the robbery of our treasury? So that's kind of where I'd like to get. So if you were writing the history of this period, and extend the period as far as you want. I go back to Vietnam because I consider this all parts of the manifestation of the American empire, the post-World War II American empire, as we extended our power around the world. And we tried to make this work we tried in Korea initially, and we went into Vietnam, and we've gone into several other places through my lifetime. And it doesn't seem as though anything has changed in our psyche. It's still the same as it was in 1950. So, Paul, why don't you give me a little reflection? I know you've been thinking about this for quite some time.
Well, yeah, I think it's fairly clear that the primary reason for the military to be acting in the way that it does is to give money to the wealthy people in the country who are busy building all the bombs and the planes and whatnot. That is the reason for doing that. Period. Discussion. That's money. They get carried away. A whole bunch of people get killed, which makes it a little hard for them to keep on stuffing money in their bags. But they figure out a way and come to it. And the military is designed to tell everybody that that's exactly what's happening is that we're bringing peace and glory to these poor suckers out here in the world, when in fact what we're doing is just basically looting their countries. Now we let the corporations do it so it doesn't look so bad. It's not really us. It's those corporate types out there with us. However, cut it. And considering that, I was thinking about that when you were talking about that. I was thinking about corporations, which of course are a British invention, and they're the ones that really started using it and cranking it all up, which is how they wound up in Afghanistan for the same reason we did. There's all those resources there, especially lithium, which we need for all our
electric cars, yeah.
all our devices to work, and so and any one of those guys gets one of those countries, other groups, whatever gets control of that, can as they say, they have us by the short and curlies, and we have to do what they tell us, which is what the Soviets were trying to do in Afghanistan too, and then they totally lost. And we with help from us, we of course were happy to kick them out, have the Afghans kick them out. But you've got, I'm sure I tell you, this is Shay's point is that we see on television now how absolutely crooked everybody is, because that's the only thing that can get them any food and housing and clothes and sustenance. That's how you get up in the world when you're in Afghanistan, as you alluded. And you know, I don't know.
So from your perspective, the things we're seeing, manifest, people in the streets and trying to get into the airport and all that business is that's just a ripple after the splash of the economic looting of the country. Really didn't. We weren't there for our stated purposes. We were there for some other purposes, which for me corresponds with what was happening in Vietnam. Steve, what are you thinking? What's your take on this? How do you feel about that?
I see a lot of similarities to Vietnam. Actually, with my daughter and son-in-law here last weekend, they're both 40. They had some insights that I thought were valid. A difference between Afghanistan and Vietnam was the elimination of the draft in between. And so Afghanistan became a conflict that we didn't pay much attention to. And it was conducted by young men who went into the military for various reasons. I think a lot of it is a good career path for young guys who don't have much else going. And then we also had a lot of contractors,
right?
Black lawyer type. And we had the ability to use drones to do selective killing without endangering some of our troops. So the casualties were Vietnam. I think the time was much longer, and the general U.S. population thinking about Afghanistan was very little. It just didn't matter so much that we were at war in Afghanistan. It wasn't anything that people were out on the streets about. If the draft was still in place, it wouldn't have lasted that long.
I see similarities also in the reaction of presidents. I remember Lyndon Johnson's general attitude towards Vietnam was I don't think he really wanted to get into it in the beginning, but once he was there, he didn't want to be the loser. And so there was this slow escalation. And I think Joe Biden saw that when he was vice president. He saw what was happening to Obama. And your mention of drones that's the highlight of the Obama administration. I think people romanticize about Barack Obama, but he killed a hell of a lot of people in Afghanistan. And the reason we didn't hear a lot about it is we didn't lose that many American soldiers. And the ones we did lose were, for the most part, contractors who didn't count in the totals. We didn't add them in. So in Vietnam, every week, if you recall, there was a list of how many American kids had died. We didn't hear that in Afghanistan in the last several years. We did early on. We did mainly in Iraq when we were there. But in Afghanistan, it was, there's occasional, probably more people died in traffic accidents than they did in combat over there. But it's interesting to me that the comparison is so clear that it's like so many other things they say. It's right in your face. It's right there. You don't have to dig too deep. You can see that we were not really there for the reasons we were saying. We weren't there to help the Afghanis create their own, independent democratic government. That was bullshit from the beginning. And I always felt like it was, and felt like, I wish the best for those folks, but I don't see any way of that happening. So I guess the takeaway, this the other part of this is, where do we go from here? Is this the end of the American empire? Are we going to no longer intervene in conflicts like this? Or are those things, Paul, that you're pointing out, going after the raw materials, going after the lithium and other things, is that going to drag us into someplace else? And if so, who's our next opponent going to be?
Well, I'm quite sure that we will figure out some other way to have another shootout over the resources. That'll be there all the time. Because one of the quotes that Sarah Chayes made in her book was, she had talked to this high level military guy and said something to him about, well, you're about them, have you not don't you know that their court, all the money is going to the folks who are looting inflation, and military guys? No, that's just how they are. That's the way they run their countries. You get a little money from them, and then it's. And she said, no, that's not how it works, And the guy was like, no, that's it. We'll go in there, and if we have to kill enough, we'll kill enough of them. But that it's not because they're looting anything. There's no corporate culture that's sucking up the money like it does in the United States.
Yeah.
And speaking of which, the other thing that makes a difference between Vietnam and, at least for me, and Afghanistan is the Vietnamese only wanted their country back. And as soon as they did, they got it. They like, okay, we're here. Thank you very much. And started doing business with us again.
Yeah.
They became a normal country. The folks in Afghanistan, on the other hand, you got 2 or 3 groups of people who have religious ideas about how they ought to act. I mean, the Taliban and the other boys in that group. I mean, which are the ones that will start the next war? Because they hate us because we're not Shia, and so yeah. I mean, and they're particularly the Taliban. They moved from being on the Pakistani side, and they've been manipulating their way into this position to try to run stuff. And that if they can take over the country, then they're gonna start sucking money out of us while looking to see who else that they can loot. So they have a larger idea in mind than just getting our country back.
Yeah, well, that's to that point. In Korea and in Vietnam, we had a division of the country. We divided it north and south, and I always wondered in Afghanistan why we didn't divide it east and west, because you have the Shias on one side, and the Sunnis on the other side. Why not, have a West Pakistan that was more, American dominated, and then basically surrender the eastern mountainous region to the Pakistanis. But I guess the economic interest made that unfeasible. How are you going to separate the pipeline? How are you going to divvy up the goods? So I think that made it difficult for us, not having any clear division. That was always a mystery. Like, they talked about where the battles are, and it seemed like it was just it's all over the place. There's things happening in different places. Didn't seem to have any cohesive structure. It was random. Maybe I don't understand it well enough to see the structure, but that's the way it was communicated to us. Steve, I'm wondering what your thoughts are about the future. The reason I like to take a historical perspective is hopefully, the people who write the history first are the ones who really have influence on the understanding of the general population. And right now, the folks who are trying to write the history are saying, basically, Joe Biden screwed up the withdrawal, and if things get all messed up there, it's all his fault. But they're not focusing on the corruption that caused this in the first place. So, do you think we can put together a narrative with people like Sarah Chayes that can pervade the public's understanding of what just happened? Is that is that impossible in what we're dealing with? Dustin talks about this quite a bit because he's really anti corporate media, and it seems to me that the corporate media is right in the same place it's always been. What do you think about
Well, yeah, I saw a news report that caught my attention last week. The Taliban sent a high-level delegation to meet with high-level members of the Chinese government. I don't know if you saw that report. And the Chinese were basically saying, we can do business with you. As Americans, we said, we don't like the way you treat your people. So that's got to change before we can do business with you. And the Chinese are, we can do business with you.
Yeah.
So I think in the future, we may not have much business in Afghanistan because the Chinese, who actually, I didn't realize this, shared a small border with Afghanistan. And the Pakistanis will certainly work their will on what happens in the areas that they have influence on. So I think we'll be out of the picture to a large extent. Now, maybe some of what we did will spawn in some resistance within Afghanistan. There are protests against the Taliban that are occurring. So maybe there'll be forces that will make a difference. That just time will tell. And to your question about the American, I don't think this is going to damage the American empire. I think the international order will be maintained despite what happens in Afghanistan.
Yeah, we also have to keep in mind the Chinese they've been working diligently on putting together and run across that vast continent a railroad track, which is of course also obviously a multi tracks, which is what it is. So they have an inexpensive way to haul material out of Afghanistan and bring it to a port. We don't have. We have to haul it out of there if we can make it through, is to haul it out and bring it through the Red Sea and all that kind of stuff. And then ship at a time. You hook up a train, you can haul a whole lot of stuff, across a long distance. And, we did that, and the Russians tried it, and they didn't succeed up in the north because they're too far north. The icy weather was just there. It is. The Chinese have better weather, and they've got that line built. They've about fixed it up. So that's going to be interesting to see what happens there.
Yeah, and I'm sure they'll be willing to sell their export to us.
Well, I think that's one of the stories that I would certainly like to hear more about. And I don't know, honestly, don't know the best source to go to find out what is actually occurring in those deals that are being made. And I understand, after the fact, you can see what happened, but right now in real time, how do we get to know what's going on? The one thing that strikes me is that Donald Trump made a deal with the Taliban, and Trump, for all his faults, and you understand where I am there, but for all his faults, he was in many ways a realist when it came to business and making deals. He's not as good as he would allege himself to be, but he could talk to people in the Taliban because he understood that this was about money. He didn't make it about human rights or the rights of women in Afghanistan. He understood it was about money. So apparently he was making a deal, Paul, to make sure that the Taliban, when it took power, and he knew they were going to, when it took power, that they would continue to do business with us. Now, Biden came in, and I think he's lost a lot of credibility over this, because he's supposed to be the guy who really understands it. He's not only going to be Mr. Empathy and take care of all these suffering people in the streets, but he also, is the foreign policy expert and knows how to get things done. Well, if there was a deal going on with the Taliban and suddenly Biden comes in and breaks it, where are they going to go besides the Chinese? What's their option? China is the biggest player around. So the Taliban, the one thing I heard, and this had to do with the collapse of the army in Afghanistan, but someone said, Afghans essentially want to be on the winning side, so they'll change sides. They don't have any, they have their religious beliefs, yes, but politically, in terms of who they're going to support, this warlord or that warlord or this group, that group, this country, they don't care. They want to be with the winner. So if Biden now changes the perception of people around the world to say, well, U.S. is not the winner, the U.S. can't be trusted, that is going to have a profound effect to what you were saying, Steve, about the American empire. American empire is like a shark. If it quits growing, if it quits moving, it dies. We have to continue to expand. If we don't continue to expand, we're going to contract. And so we could have, as Sarah Chase says, we've made the situation worse. On balance, everything we did in Afghanistan made things worse than it was before we went in. So.
I don't want to hear that. Our politicians don't want to hear that.
I think there are things that are worse. I'm not saying there aren't some things that are worse. For example, now the Taliban may be free to be safe harbor for terrorist plots.
Right.
But I think we still have. We'll see how it goes with economics and the Chinese in the future. That'll be an interesting dynamic, but that's more important in terms of American empire than what our reputation is when we left Afghanistan. I think people will forget that. It'll depend on, where else what other country we're going to go into, to try to support our idea of maybe under the guise of supporting American democracy and democratic ideals, where it's really a business arrangement. I think the business arrangements will be more and more business arrangements and less about going in with warlike intentions. Mm-hmm. We'll see.
No, that's the side of this that's not being presented honestly to the American public.
No,
we're being fed a line about women's rights, and that's when I say things like this, I hope you understand. I'm totally empathetic to the fact that women get treated like shit in that country, and that's a horrible thing. But I also know that's true around the world in many, many countries.
Right.
So if we're going to address the issue of women being treated badly, we can start at home by ending the sex trade. We can start here by taking care of single moms who can't raise their children. I mean, there's all sorts of things we can do to address that issue, which in the long run might have more impact on other countries. And growing up, I always felt like the American strength was our example. That we were the good guys with the white hats. We were the people who believed in doing what's right. And I think we lost that in the shuffle in the last 50 years. And I don't know, I can't see this from the perspective of others, but I'm hearing the reports out of Germany and France and England now that are extremely critical of what we've been doing in Afghanistan. And should we get involved in another struggle, whether it's in the Middle East or elsewhere, I doubt that people are going to be lining up behind us to support us. They may not oppose us, but they're not gonna be with us. So I think we're, I don't know, with in terms of the American empire, when I say that, when I use that term with most of the people I know, they ask me, what the hell are you talking about, American empire? We're not an empire. Well, look at what we got. We're obviously an empire. So.
When you mentioned the plight of women in Afghanistan, and that maybe that's not really what we were after, it came to mind. No, we don't go after Saudi Arabia for the way they treat women.
Right. Yeah. That's, and in relation to that, right now they're struggling to evacuate all of the Americans and the interpreters and the other people, and as many people as they can. Why isn't Saudi Arabia taking some of those people? Aren't they our ally? They're pretty close at hand. But Israel, why doesn't Israel take some? I mean, we've been supporting them for decades. This is our time of need. Where are they standing? So I think when you lose people's confidence in not only your ability to do something, but your will to do it, I think we've set a very dangerous precedent. We've spent our capital in terms of our good name around the world. So anyway, I've kind of sounded off here. I don't want to dominate. Anything else hit your attention about this week? Anything?
Mostly, I've been spending my time trying not to have to watch it.
Yeah,
it's pretty ghastly what's going on, and it's just like, you just watch it and think, oh my Lord, these poor people. I mean, and look at how many of them are trying to get out of the country, which is really phenomenal. There's an incredible number of people trying to get out of there, and aside from the fact that this is the fact that they were trying to, how much people who live there, who are natives, didn't want to be there.
Yeah.
They got to understand what their choices were. And I keep now thinking, what is the Taliban going to do to the social network that exists in Afghanistan? They're going to try to roll it back to the 4th century, and that'll be interesting to see if they try to do that. And which they won't, but they'll put out the front. That's the thing. Their whole thing is, we're going to do. We want to be like the Muhammad lived that way. He was a camel thief, among other things. And so, if you're going to have that bunch of folks out there, it'd be like having any James Jones running the country. This guy who suddenly decides everybody should die.
No.
And this is what these folks are basically doing. They think no BS about it. They pull somebody out of the truck, blow them away just like that, and cheer them for themselves. So you're going to see what's this all going to come out, and how much will anybody be doing any business with them who doesn't have to? I don't know. I mean, it's going to be kind of interesting. We can't shut down everybody in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Can't run everything that's run badly at this point.
Do you have any I won't say predictions, but what trend line do you think that will go with this group who's now taken over the country? Are they going to become neo-capitalists and try to get wealthy? Or are they going to impose a religious regime and, as Paul says, go back to the couple thousand years?
I think they'll do both those things. They will. The people on the top of the pile will start scraping together. There's all this nice money coming to us, and all you other people out there, you go and do what we tell you about how you want to live, which is practically nothing, and do as we say. I think money ultimately will corrupt even the Taliban.
Yeah, I think it'll be a totalitarian government, and that they'll rule, with all the corruption that they've seen in Afghanistan forever. And you asked about other thoughts. What are our Republican compatriots saying about this? They're saying it's all Biden's fault.
Sure.
And our good buddy Tucker Carlson this week was showing pictures of passengers on a plane leaving Afghanistan who are almost all Afghanistan. And he's saying, this is what's happened here. It happened before in previous wars. We invade them and then they invade us. There'll be millions coming into this country as immigrants. And of course, after Vietnam, there were maybe 130, 150,000 Vietnamese who came in, but not millions. And so they're still misstating facts in order to create fear in their Republican to support the agenda that they want to support, which is electing more Republicans.
Right. I kind of see the Taliban as an echo of the brown shirts in Germany in the 30s. They facilitated the takeover of the country, and once they had achieved that, the real power brokers behind the scenes took over, and that was, it was Hitler certainly, but it was also the large businesses, the Farber and the other big businesses that took it over. So I think that the Taliban is a short. After all, in Arabic, the Taliban refers to students. So I see the Taliban as like a student uprising. Well, it doesn't last because when they grow older, they're no longer students. So I think it's going to be a short-lived experience.
Learning from history, Hitler had the leader of the brown shirts assassinated.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's going to be interesting to play it out. And I guess, as I said in the beginning, what I hope can be done, and I don't know what we could do to do this, but I think it's important to question the narrative that's being presented to us about why this happened. I think we're going to get a lot of lies, and I think they need to be challenged, whether they come from Tucker Carlson or Joe Biden, doesn't matter to me. If it's not true, those assertions need to be challenged. And I'm looking for some champions to do that, to speak to the issues and not cast bullshit. But the one thing that I hope would be uncovered is what has been actually going on in Afghanistan for the last 20 years in terms of the extraction of raw materials and other wealth from the country. What's happened in the poppy trade? What's going on with lithium mines? And an expose of what is really occurring there, because otherwise it's just a facade of the fluff that they put up, which could lead us back into another enterprise. Now, part of me says, if we want to be blatant about it, then next time we need something like lithium, go in and take the stuff. Just go in and take it, and don't pretend you're doing anything else. If at least be straightforward. The British were more like that than we are. Just be straight. But we're going to come in and take it. Just because we're strong and we can. So if we played it that way, I mean, ironically, I think I'd feel better about it because it wouldn't string people along to believe the myth of nation building and democratization. That's never happened. We're not doing it. We never have done it. Whether it's in the Philippines or in Vietnam or anywhere where we've tried these things, we've never been honest and sincere about it. So that's the message I would hope to put out. So if you find those resources and those champions I was talking about who could speak to this, I think Sarah Chase is a good example of it, but I'd like to hear more.